In July 1976, Gordon Cook, a 37-year-old businessman, set sail from Plymouth, England, with his family. For 16 years, he and his wife Mary had spent their leisure time honing their seafaring skills in British waters, preparing to duplicate the 200-year-old round-the-world voyage of Captain James Cook. Their vessel, Wavewalker, was a 23-meter wooden beauty professionally built to withstand the roughest conditions. The crew was small: Gordon, Mary, their 7-year-old daughter Suzanne, their 6-year-old son Jonathan, and 2 hired hands, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Siegler. The first 105,000 kilometers down the African coast passed pleasantly, but after leaving Cape Town, they turned east, heading directly into the southern Indian Ocean, a stretch of water notorious for some of the world's most violent seas. They had spent over a decade preparing for this journey, fitting out the Wavewalker and testing it in heavy gales.
But all of that careful preparation was about to be tested by a physical force that defied standard maritime expectations. By January 2nd, the gales that had followed them from Cape Town reached a breaking point. The waves grew to 15 meters, the height of the ship's main mast. The crew double-lashed everything, donned their life jackets, and waited as the screaming wind and spray made the air itself painful to breathe. At 6 p.m., the wind suddenly dropped, and the sky grew dark. An enormous cloud appeared to tower aft of the ship, only to reveal itself as a wave unlike any other. It stood perfectly vertical, rising nearly 30 meters with a frightful breaking crest. The impact sounded like a thunderous explosion as a torrent of green and white water smashed into the deck. Gordon was thrown overboard, watching the ship nearly capsize as he sank below the waves. He was losing consciousness and had accepted his death when a secondary wave hurled the Wavewalker upright, jerking his lifeline taut and tossing him back onto the deck. The strike left the ship in ruins. The starboard hull bulged inward, the main rib frames were smashed down to the keel, and the decks were completely flooded. Gordon crawled toward the children's cabin, finding them alive but shaken, with Sue already showing a significant injury above her eyes. They were now in a remote corner of the ocean, with a sinking ship and no response to their mayday calls. Their survival would not be determined by outside rescue, but by how long they could keep the water from overwhelming the broken hull. Gordon scrambled to the deck with a hammer, screws, and heavy canvas. He managed to stretch it across the gaping holes in the starboard side, securing waterproof hatch covers. The bulk of the incoming sea was now being deflected, but the mechanical situation was deteriorating. The hand pumps began to clog with debris, and the primary electric pump short-circuited as the water level rose. On deck, they realized their 2 spare hand pumps had been swept overboard along with the main anchor. The crisis was momentarily abated when Gordon remembered a second electric pump hidden beneath the chart room floor. He connected it and gained ground against the flood. Amidst the pumping and steering, 7-year-old Sue's condition worsened. Her head had swollen alarmingly, and her eyes were narrowed to slits. When Gordon asked why she hadn't mentioned the deep cut on her arm, she told him she didn't want to worry him while he was trying to save everyone. The mechanical patches held, but the human cost was rising. For 36 continuous hours, the crew stayed in a rotation of pumping and steering, physically exhausted and shivering in the freezing cold, as they fought desperately to keep the Wavewalker from the bottom. By January 4th, the water was controlled, but the ship was a shell of itself. The main mast was ruined, the auxiliary engine was dead, and the hull barely held together. They couldn't reach Australia. Their only hope was a tiny French scientific base. This was their target, Ile Amsterdam. Gordon was looking for a 65-kilometer-wide rock hidden within 150,000 kilometers of open ocean. Navigation was now a matter of dead reckoning. Using a spare compass that hadn't been corrected for magnetic variation, he manually calculated the influence of strong westerly currents. A mistake meant sailing into empty ocean. On January 5th, the weather turned again. As Gordon went to comfort the children, 6-year-old John asked if they were going to die.
Before Gordon could answer, John told him, "We aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. You and Mummy, Sue and I." That statement changed the nature of the fight. Gordon left the cabin determined to protect the weakened starboard side, using an improvised sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and plastic paraffin barrels to face the oncoming waves. On January 6th, the wind finally eased. Gordon returned to the chart room to work on his final wind speeds and course changes. He calculated a desperate heading of 185 degrees and told Larry to steer it, claiming they would see the island by 5 p.m. Gordon didn't actually believe his own prediction. Exhausted and heavy-hearted, he went below and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke at 6 p.m., the cabin was dark. He was certain they had missed the island and knew they didn't have enough sail left to beat back into the wind. He was interrupted by John and Sue, who appeared by his bunk to tell him he was the best captain in the world. He didn't understand until they told him the island was right in front of them. Gordon quickly rushed to the deck and finally saw the stark volcanic silhouette of Ile Amsterdam emerging from the mist. They anchored offshore, and the next morning, the island's 28 inhabitants helped them onto land. The ordeal was over, though the physical toll remained. Sue eventually required 6 operations to remove a recurring blood clot resulting from the head injury she had tried to hide during the storm. Gordon Cook found the island through dead reckoning, but he only had the mental clarity to calculate that course because his crew absorbed the chaos. While he worked the numbers, Mary stayed at the wheel for the crucial hours. Larry and Herb pumped until the water receded, and the 2 children chose not to complain about their injuries so their father could focus solely on getting them home.